All right, welcome back to Little Jim Big Heart, our interview series where I just call up a bunch of people and friends of mine and talk to them about stuff that they're doing in the industry that might help future fitness professionals or people that run gyms. And today I've got Joe Meglio. So Joe and I go way, way back. We I had a few snippets. I was actually hoping to find it, but I downloaded Joe's first ebook, Deadlift
Oh
Like a
boy.
Man. Deadlift Like a Man, because Joe could deadlift like 660 pounds or something. And he wrote an ebook that I was really into. I went to a couple like trainings with him when he was interning. I guess maybe it was a job after college, but
Yeah.
he's blown up this amazing business. So, Joe, thanks for joining. Why don't you give us like a 10-second rundown of your background?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to be here with you, Devin. And we do go way back, and wow, that feels like a lifetime ago. But yeah, I mean, I started my business 11 years ago. We have 14 locations, 11 open, three in production. We're like in December of 2024, but we do like similar to you, Devin, right? We do personal training for busy adults. And we've our business, the business I started is not the business we have today, so it's evolved a lot. Learned a ton over the years. But yeah, just super excited to be here and to have a conversation.
Hell yeah. So you said the business you started is not the business that you have. One, I listen, I appreciate you kept that to a legitimate 10-second background. Because a lot of people go long on that. But what was the first business that you started?
Yeah, it was athlete training, right? I was a baseball player in college, I think similar to you, right?
Yep.
So when I started, was in 600 square feet in a baseball facility where they throw the birthday parties. And we turned that into a little gym, and that's what I did. I trained all baseball players and athletes, and it wasn't until probably 6 months in, where it was March, and everyone goes to play baseball. You're like, man, I got to train some people, and your business evolves from that, right? So we started training adults slowly but surely, and we, really owned and operated the one location for 6 or 7 years heavily. That's where I spent all my time. It wasn't really until 2018 that we started to expand a bit. Um, and I look at where we got, it's been two levels of expansion. The first was more opportunistic. That was locations two, three, and four. And then
Yeah.
since then, 5 through 14 has been more strategic. So things have definitely evolved. The business has evolved. How we do things has evolved, but all for the good, I hope.
Yeah. So the model that you've expanded is small group personal training, right?
Yeah.
What is it, six, seven per session?
Yeah, up to six with a coach. And when I was running the one facility, we ran a layered approach where we did athlete performance, we did our, personal training in a small group, we did our large group training, and we do our personal training in a small group. We would have four coaches on the floor, but in our newer studios, it's just one coach every session on the hour, 45-minute session. So we're in and out quickly. And we just run that all day,
Yeah.
6 days a week typically.
Now, again, we've known each other for a long time. We've run in like business coaching groups together, and you were one of the first that were really doing small group. Like you made that switch, and I was like, man, like what is this guy doing? Because you were always really sharp and super knowledgeable. I mean, I think you are, if I remember this, you went to school for entrepreneurship, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you got a
I
good
think you're
memory.
one of the first, one of the like the only gym owners in my circle that actually has like a business degree, and you were always like really tuned into the business side, which I appreciate now more than ever because of what you run into as you grow a fitness business.
For
Um,
sure.
so do you still have the original location? Because that was like a 6,000 square foot adult, large group, small group athlete. Do you still have that spot?
Yeah, so we do. The first one was in that baseball space. We
Right.
grew out of that in like 2 years, and then we moved into the warehouse that you just referenced. So we still have that. It's been, boy, how many years coming up? It's probably 8, 9 years that we've been in the warehouse, and then the newer ones are typically they're a quarter of the size,
Yeah.
and a quarter to a third of the size, and it's retail space. So definitely a different vibe and model than the HQ one, the original one. But we only run our personal training out of here now, and we still do some athlete performance, but we don't run our large groups. So that was a change that we made post COVID or during COVID, and we never went back to it, just so we could really focus on the one thing that we wanted to get really good at. So that was definitely a change that we made quite a few years back now.
All right, cool. Well, and that kind of, just that notion, leading up to this call, we were like, what are we going to talk about? I try to be very tactical. And honestly,
Yeah.
I think the thing that I appreciate most about you and watching you grow over the years, like you just had a fucking very laser focus on like not being afraid to pivot, being very disciplined with the decisions that you make. And I think that lends itself because we never drop large group, right? My main location, we still do large group. I like it. I mean, it's kind of a value add for our people. It adds a tiny bit of scheduling complexity, but that was one thing. Like you were always very, very deliberate and intentional about everything, like your pricing, the moves you made with your schedule. So I think that's a really good place to kind of jump off at is like operationally. Uh, First, I do want to talk about the word operations or the department operations in fitness. So it's a very, very misunderstood concept that I've seen in the fitness industry. And I don't hear a lot of people talk about what is operations truly, and it actually wasn't until we hired somebody and put them into like a true operations manager role that I was like, what the fuck does that even mean? So what is operations from your perspective in the fitness industry?
Yeah, I think it's service delivery, right? So we're in a service business and it's service delivery, right? So that's how I think about operations. If you think about you're in a brick and mortar business, it's everything that happens from outside the parking lot till somebody walks in your facility, your unit, until you, so that's like the front stage, right? What happens on the workout floor in the front desk area, how you greet people, how you train them, all of that. And then backstage operations too is like how do you make the sausage, right? How does that all happen behind the scenes? What goes into all of that to have a consistent front stage experience? So when I think of operations, I think about it that way. It's service delivery, both what happens front stage and backstage to make that come to life. And it's something that I think if you want to have high retention, you want to be really intentional about how you think about creating that experience, for sure. And then I've done a lot of work over the years, like studying and whether it's Disney or Ritz-Carlton or whatever, places that provide that, really great experience. And I think the more intentional you are about it, it's more than just showing up and being a good coach. You want to, especially if you're scaling multiple locations, you want to really think about, okay, what am I actually scaling? What is the service that we're providing and how are we making that happen? Because it's not going to happen by chance, certainly not across multiple locations.
Yeah, and so the concept that you touched on both sides. So a lot of people when they think operations, right? What I initially just thought was like it's the client experience, right? It's great customer service. It's, manufacturing that. But where a lot of people mistake is like the back end processes. They really, really neglect that when they talk about operations. They're just like, yeah, you're the GM. You're gonna be in charge of like making sure everyone's happy. But truly, if you really want to take an operational approach, you want to look at like the bottlenecks in your business, the throughput, like how much, from a financial perspective, from a client experience perspective, from an employee and like marginal, like a financial margins perspective. Um, and that's where I think like you have a really strong sense of like how to approach, how many people per session, how much do we make, how do we charge for that? Is there anything in there that you think you guys do exceptionally well when like structuring the back end or like analyzing bottlenecks in your business?
Yeah, I think one of the things I did early on was begin with the end in mind. And it was almost what I mean by that is like design the business backwards,
Yeah.
right? So if you think of your business, whether it's one facility or multiple, what I would use is like, what are the unit economics of that business, right? And basically, you could just, especially now with AI and Excel, you could find that out pretty
It's so
quickly,
easy. Yeah.
right? Yeah, just like if I train this many people per hour, or this many people in the session with, and I'm employing one coach. If I run this many sessions per week, if this is what the average price, you can figure out what the revenue capacity is of your business relatively easy, and you can run how you can learn part of operations is running an efficient business, and you can understand what the margin you want to have on that is. But I think about it that way. You want to work backwards, right? And that is part of operations. It's understanding how you do what you do, right? Are you doing a small group model? Are you doing a large group model? Because all that's going to impact what your pricing structure, and all of that. So that is the part of operations that's really foundational, is really figuring that out. Because I think the biggest mistake a lot of gym owners make is they are running a small group model with large group pricing, right? You probably see that all the time, and you've got black hole pricing, and you can't sign up enough members to work your way out of that because it's just not built. You're building on a crappy foundation. So when I think about operations, that's part of it too. It's like you want to make sure you're running a well-oiled machine, and you need to make sure that your service matches with what you're charging in the market. And that's a huge part of it. So I think beginning with the end in mind, understanding what product or service you're delivering and how to appropriately price that is important, because there's no one way to do things, right? You can do it any way, but you got to make sure that you're priced appropriately, that you're staffed appropriately. And quite honestly, one of the reasons why we made that switch from having a more complex operation where we had athlete training, large group and small group, it was just operationally complex. There's a different personality that you need to coach a large group versus a small group. There's different traits, personality traits that you need. So there's so much that goes into it. So when I think about operations, it's everything that goes into it, right? Everything backstage that it affects what you see happening on the floor ultimately.
Yeah, and I think again, if anybody takes anything away, like that's the one thing in every single meeting, like start with the end in mind. Like, what is the goal for this? And most people never jump to that first and they just start doing stuff. And again, they build on
Hmm.
broken models or they just do stuff without really looking at all the factors like operational efficiency,
Complexity. Yeah.
even just opportunity cost. Like I'll give you an example of that. Like we worked with a soccer program for years. We would sponsor them, but there was a nonprofit, so they had a budget built in for team training, and they would pay us $1,200 for every team, and every year we would take on 20 teams to train one night a week. And it was this massive thing. And I'm like laughing my way to the bank. We're like $30,000 in cash. Like, this is amazing. But it was incredibly like it was huge to put together. We had to staff now like 20 extra sessions every single week. We had to cut a bunch of our adult fitness sessions. We had to drop like it was just super complex and we never retained athletes on the back end. So I'm like, man, every year we did it because we always just saw the upside was there, but it was always very, very close. Like we weren't
Yeah.
really profiting on the program. We were profiting of the exposure and the reputation that we got to build, but that $30,000, whatever it was, usually turned out to be 20 grand, never really made us money. And that's like what that real understanding of operations and throughput and like all those other factors that are not surface level. So that's, one of the things we always hammer on is like in meetings, whenever we talk about something, it's like, hey, what's the goal here? Let's start with the end in mind. How do we know this is successful? Let's work backwards. And a lot of times we come to like, oh shit, this makes no sense at all to actually do. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
so is there a standard that you set? So we use the term, it's a little butchered from the traditional term, but we call it a hurdle rate. Is there a standard that you set, like starting a new program, adding a new session time? Like, is there a clearance of gain that you need to break, like a threshold that you need to break in order to make that decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple things that we look at when we're making decisions. First off, we definitely want to look at the data. I think that's important. I think that's
Yeah.
something that everyone needs to do a better job of, right? Because the reality is, if the more you could just rely on the facts, the easier the decisions become, right? So there's two that when you were talking come to mind. For me, it's payroll as a percentage of revenue, right? So what can we actually support in adding new programs, new session times, or X, whatever that X is, whatever that delta is. So we want to, for us, love to see, if I was a single operator and I was heavily involved in the business, maybe I was the GM or whatever. I think upwards, somewhere between 30 and 40% would be where I'd want that number to be, no more than that.
And that
Um,
includes, now, would you have your payroll included in that?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. If I'm looking at, my model now, where that's not necessarily how it's built, 30% is where we would really want that number to be. Under 30%. payroll as a percentage of revenue. If we're within that, then we have wiggle room to add more session times to test different things out. Or if we're going to exceed that threshold, we know that, hey, we're going to do this for a period of time, but we're expecting to see that percentage come back down because we're going to add new revenue. And if not, it's pretty obvious, right? That it didn't work how we wanted it to. So I think percentage as a payroll as a percentage of revenue is one of those metrics. And then utilization is another,
Yeah.
right? So if we're, if the average in a week, if we have 50 sessions and, we have up to six people in each session, that's 300, my math, right? 300 people that we could have in a week, right? So if I want to see a utilization rate of 80%, that number needs to be north of 240, if my math is right. If it's way below that, if it's trending in the wrong direction, I would say then, okay, well, adding that session really not moving the needle. So utilization, I think, is important, and the trend of that utilization. It's not like is it off track
Right.
for 1 week, but what's the moving trend of that? But those two numbers, I mean, would tell me everything I need to know about how efficient we are, or if adding that revenue stream or those classes or sessions or whatever is positively impacting the business, right? I'm either going to see
Yeah.
payroll go up and my percentage of payroll is going to either come down or maybe stay the same, but revenue's higher. And my utilization is going to move in the right direction as well. If you make a decision and utilization just tanks, and you'll have a pretty clear picture of that. And then you can also get a little bit more granular with that and look at your utilization of different session times, right, or class times that you're having. You can see which ones are the more popular, which ones are the least popular, and any changes you make, you can see how that impacts those numbers if you needed to get a little bit more nuance with it. But I would say those are two things that come to mind when I'm evaluating different decisions or if I'm using data to make those decisions.
And what's the threshold that you need to break? So let's say, you're adding a new session time. What is is there like a percentage profit that you need to see, or like, is there a rule that you've set that's like, hey, we don't add anything unless I know that it's going to add 30% above the expense to add it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we get that specific with it, quite
Yeah.
honestly. I think I keep it the simpler, I would say, especially at scale, the more simpler criteria I have to make decisions or that we have to make decisions, we tend to default to that. So if it falls within our payroll budget that we
Right.
have allocated, given our revenue, we have that wiggle room to make whatever decisions we want to make, I would say, because it's going to show, and it's not easy to achieve that payroll number, right? So it's not like there's this infinite room to
Right.
make all these different decisions, right? So I think that it's like, how could I simplify things as much as possible? I think that's how we do it. But not to say you shouldn't add extra layers, but just doing things at scale, I think the simpler decision matrix we have or the tripwires we have, the easier it is to manage. So for that reason, we keep it probably even simpler than that. So no, we don't have that in
Yeah.
place. We just keep it pretty simple, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and listen, that we've talked about it on this podcast. Like, it's almost like your salary cap, right? Like 30, or it's like
Yeah,
30%.
exactly.
I have a 30% salary cap. So when people want to make more money, or like employees come and they're like looking for opportunities, we're very transparent. We're very open book in my companies. And I'm like, listen, we got a 30% salary cap. We can drive revenue up, or we can try to operate with less people. And then maybe you get a little bit of a bigger chunk of the pie. But, analyzing that, like staying on that whole topic. So payroll, as a percentage of revenue is an awesome metric. That there's a few little levers that, like, if you just operated your business with this, like, payroll stays under 30% of the business. Like, there are things like that that kind of check the box of like healthy business.
Yeah.
It's hard to run a bad business if your payroll is below 30% of your top line revenue. But ways that people can think about that, and this is where like the operations thinking becomes really helpful, is so I'll give you the example for us. We had a salesperson that was getting kind of hitting a bottleneck with like how many leads they could process at one time. So when we would run like really big campaigns, they would be like bombarded with leads. They wouldn't get to them right away, and it just wasn't super effective. So that became the bottleneck. Like, one salesperson can handle one kind of consult call or sales call at a time. So it's like, how do we get more from this? Right? Is we could obviously just charge more for what we're doing, and that makes it make more sense. But actually, what we settled on was we started doing group sales calls, and we were doing like this person would get bombarded, and then we're like, hey, instead of one call per person, let's try to get 10 people on a call on Zoom, and we do a group close. And it was like that's just like an operational mindset for, all right, how do we relieve this bottleneck? We can either, find somebody that can do it for, or add another salesperson, which obviously changes the payroll as a percentage of revenue. We can charge way more for what we're selling, or we can try to get more people in that one-time slot. So I think those are things that a lot of people in that operations thinking, they don't think about that stuff. They think about the client experience, but they don't think about how to optimize what they call like throughput.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually like that a lot. So one of the things that I believe in is anytime you have goals, whether like what you just said are examples of that, having constraint around those goals are going to force creativity, like what you
Yeah.
just, the example you just gave, which I think is great. And that is like a broad um, framework, but it applies on a level like you just said. It would apply to a bigger level of your business and maybe goals you have for your business as well. But I think just having constraints around the things that you're trying to accomplish is really important because it's going to force that level of creativity that sometimes you need if you're going to get things done. But I think that's also why knowing what the success criteria is or the definition of what success is super important. Because if you're not clear on that, then I think you're gonna, it's very easy to be you can just try a bunch of things and nothing's going to stick if you're just not clear on what success looks like. So I think when you're clear on success and you have constraints or you know what your available resources are, you can get creative within that to accomplish whatever the end goal is.
Another point that I was going to make is, getting granular about what success looks like and having that success criteria, but also not being married to the way in which you accomplish it. So
Exactly.
we've been faced with a lot of times where we're like, all right, we need 20 new members. And, you know, a lot of times we would kind of initially stop at just that point of like, that's the end goal. We need 20 new people. But why? What's important about that is like, well, we need more revenue and we need more profit. So you can actually just get the same revenue and profit by charging more or upselling the current clients that you do have. So a lot of people so this is what they call lateral thinking. A lot of people think in a very linear fashion where it's like, I need to make more revenue. I need another member. I need more members. But really, it's like, if revenue is the goal, there are other avenues for doing that. And I think people need to like force themselves. What is the five whys of like the end in mind and then why? And then see if there's maybe an easier route to get there.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think if you ask most gym owners, they would tell you that they need more leads. But
Yeah, yeah.
what they fail to look at is what's the conversion of those leads to a phone call or to an
Yep.
appointment, and the conversion of that appointment to a trial and to a member, and then what's your retention rate on top of that, right? So the answer isn't always more leads, right? You have to look at it through different lens or laterally, like you said, because it's not just maybe what it appears to be at the onset, right? So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So if you were, again, I mentioned this before, like you've always been very deliberate and intentional about the way move in business. And if when you're starting and building Game Changer, like how do you structure starting with the end in mind, building the perfect facility?
Yeah, I think knowing what I know now, and none of this is how I did it early on because I just didn't know
Right.
any better. But knowing what I know now, I think it really starts with understanding what is the service that you're providing, right? And just to, not to go into too much detail, but when I started out 600 square feet, we could only fit like six people in there at a time or eight people or whatever it was. When we went to 6,000, that six to eight grew, right? It
Yeah.
doubled and then we added another six or eight. Next thing you know, there were like two coaches for 25 people. I'm like, whoa, this is not this is
Yeah.
not like our secret sauce, right? So I think having that realization was important to me. And then you start to play with the numbers a little bit and you realize, okay, well, like I have an idea of what I want to make per session or per hour. This is what I was roughly doing back then. And I figured, well, like that's not going to work at these current rates. I really need to charge more money if I want to, really get that coach to member ratio down or
Well,
whatever.
let me
So
stop you because there's a really
yeah,
important.
yeah.
It's complete like the mistake a lot of gym owners make, but a lot of businesses make is it has nothing to do with it has something to do with it, but it doesn't matter what you feel like it's worth or should cost. Like there's just an economic reality to what you
Exactly.
have to charge if you want to be in business. And most people are like, I want to make this much, but it's like, let's ground this in like the economic reality of running the business. If you need 30% margins, you need to like make sure everything is priced for that. So sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I mean just look at a lot of the franchise brands as an example of that. There's so many gym owners I've spoken to over the years that are priced like a class-based concept that's got 30 people, except they have 8 people or
Yeah.
10 people in their sessions, right? So the economics are not going to add up. They're not going to make sense. So go kind of the theme of this conversation has been that you really like number what I know now. I would start with the end in mind. I would know exactly what I'm trying to make per session or per hour and back my way into that, right? Okay, well, knowing that if the top end is $500, how am I going to get there? Do I want to train 10 people, right? Charging 50, like, and this is just
Yeah.
an example. It's not a model that I subscribe to, but I'm just using round numbers here. How am I going to get there, right? So understanding, you know, uh, you need to merge like what you do best and making sure you charge appropriately from, just from the economics working out.
Well, so
That's what I would do.
let's get specific on it because I think this is really helpful. So
Yeah,
you mentioned a few times, and I personally I've never looked at it on the per hour as much as I just do it like per day or per month. Uh,
sure.
if you're going to add a session, what profit do you want for that session to make
I would,
sense?
yeah, gross margin 70%, right? Like after you pay all, your expenses, 70% is where you want to be. If you're bringing in, whatever it is, I would say that's really where we want to be.
So
70 to
and
80%. If
again,
you're just looking at, yeah,
let's get
you
specific.
go.
So game changer, or, you don't have to get the most accurate numbers, but
Sure.
how much per hour do you need to make in order for like a session to make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say the cap in most locations is probably 300 per
Okay.
hour is where we're going to be, right? So that would be $50 per person. And if there's up 6 people in that session, that would be $300 that we could make in any given session. That would be the capacity of that session.
That's the session revenue, right? And then
Correct.
if you were teaching this to a kindergartner, how would you teach
Yeah.
the margins of that session? So you've got your payroll. So how much does it cost for a trainer to run that? Let's
Yeah.
say $30 just to keep round
Yeah.
numbers.
Exactly.
So now you're at, 270. How do you, and this is, I was kind of getting at this point, how do you take all the other shit and
Yeah.
find the other expenses of that session? Because a lot of people just think it's payroll and that's kind of it. But you got to take
Exactly.
all the expenses divided by, if you had a specific formula that you could teach, what would it look like?
Boy, I would just give you the answer, the 70% gross
Yeah.
margin on it, because that's somewhere along the lines. That's what we figured out. And I don't know how, but I would just go with that. So that would be that would be the cheat code for it. Just take 70% of that, and that's what you would want it to be, right? So that would factor in, your other expenses other than just payroll, right? Because in your example, which I think is pretty accurate of where you'd want to be from a payroll perspective, you would then be at 90%, right? So another 20% would come from all the other expenses of a business. But people don't take that into account, right? How many trainers have you talked to that they're giving away 50% of the session to a
Yeah.
trainer, but like you didn't factor in your rent, you didn't factor in anything
Yeah.
other
And
than that, and
fees,
you have to,
utilities.
Yeah, it all adds up. It all adds up quickly too. So, but I would look at it from that lens of, our gross margin, we want it to be at 70%, I would say, payroll. But that's how we look at it.
So then you can do, so all right, you need to make $300 per hour. You're going to pay your coach,
Yeah.
$30. All the other expenses, let's say it's another $50 an hour. So now
Hmm.
you're at this revenue, let's say that's, 70%. Um,
Real one
then
one thing I'll
then you
add
want to
too.
look at how you
What-
want to deliver the service, right? If you truly
Yeah.
started with the end in mind, you would start with that revenue per hour. Then you're like, all right, what can I deliver that is worth, how many people can I service? So 300 divided by 50 is 6, right? No.
300
Yeah.
divided
Divided
by,
by
say that
50.
again.
300
Yeah,
divided by
6. Yep.
50 is 6. So then you're like, all right, I think I can charge $50 an hour so we can have 6 people per session. right? So that's how you determine how many people per session that you can reasonably service with a good quality in an hour that equals 300. Um, or you could be like, I could charge double that, and maybe we have three people per session, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of blending. And this is where I was kind of getting at with the where people don't think of operations. They simply, a lot of times, they only think about the service offering, but not how it all kind of combines to like, now we've got to create a product that is worth $50 per hour that we
Yeah.
can deliver for six people so that all of this comes together.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to backtrack a little bit, I think the way that I model this out typically slightly different, but we'll look at a couple of different things. We'll look at what we just went through, how many people per session, what's the average price that they're paying per session. That's going to give you your revenue capacity. But on top of that, you need to know how many sessions you're going to run a week, right? Because that's going to tell you on an annual basis or a monthly basis, what's that revenue potential. It's not enough just to look at it, by session. And then to get back to that 70%, that's going to take, because generally in a business, you have more payroll than just the trainer. Right? You may have a GM, like you said, maybe you have front desk. That's taking into account that payroll number of 30%. So we're just looking at that as that's what we're looking at as the gross margin. So that doesn't even factor in like rent or any of that other
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, so that's how we as I'm thinking through this in my head, that's how we got to that 70%. It's you're not just taking, okay, there was one coach on the floor for an hour,
Right.
but you also have someone who runs the facility. Maybe you have some administrative help, maybe you have some marketing help, whatever it is, you have other people that are involved in that operation, and you need to take those salaries into place, not just the trainer salary. So that's how we get to that 70%. But yeah, when we model this out, we're looking at, okay, if we can run 50 sessions a week at $300, a session max, you do the math on that, right? You multiply that out, you can figure out what your revenue potential is, but you also need to factor in your utilization, right? Not every session is going to be filled 100% of the time. So that's where we talked about utilization earlier. That's where maybe multiplying that number by zero point 0.8 or 80% or 75%, which is going to be your utilization goal, is going to give you really where like that business should land, should you have proper utilization.
So
So
let's
it's one
let's
thing.
do this.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun. So I'm just kind of picturing this in my head. All the numbers that you just said, I want to keep going with that to help somebody
Yeah.
think. It's almost like taken from the bottom up and the top down. So you're like, we're going to run 50 sessions a week at
Yeah.
the goal being the max is 300 per session. So 300 times
Correct.
50 is that's 150,000.
15,000. Yeah.
15,000
Yeah.
per, and then you divide that or times 4.2 technically, I guess. But so
Yeah.
that's 60,000, right? So a month, if you
Then
just
you
divide by four,
then you
you're
take the utilization off of that. So you'd be down to like 52, 51.
so that's your revenue potential, right, for the
Yeah.
business. Now, let's say you're sitting at home, you're crunching all your numbers and you're doing your business plan. You're like, wow, this is amazing. Then what? Because then we got to go get a space. The other number that we build all of it on is 30% payroll, and we do our best to keep our rent below 15% of our top line revenue. So now you've got to find a space to deliver this service that doesn't cost more than 15% of 52, right? So let's
Exactly.
round numbers. Let's just say it's got to cost less than 8,000 a month. So now you've got the next piece of the puzzle because if the rent is too high, it fucks up all of your margins.
And it's fixed cost. You can't
Yeah.
change your rent if you're not making your money. So yeah.
But that's kind of where, and it's like delivering the service from fixed cost and like delivering the service where it all blends to where some people find they're like, oh, fuck, I have a broken business. Or where
Yeah.
they're like, I'm in a sweet spot. I just have to now relieve the bottlenecks because it's like structurally it's all there, but then it's like, all right, now I have to get leads that convert, and then you have to fix those, operational bottlenecks too.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I just see too many people, they don't have an idea of what their model actually is. It's a very blurry model, but they can't put numbers to it, right? They don't know what done looks like. They don't know what their
Right.
revenue, what their facility looks like at full tilt, and that's something that you want to know, right? Because you can't make strategic decisions without knowing, we're operating at. If you have no idea how much room you have in your business, how are you going to know whether to expand your current business, whether you want to go out and open more? You can't make real decisions without that knowledge. So I think that's when I'm working with someone, that's always the thing I want everyone to get really clear on is what is your working model, right? What does your financial model look like? Because it's going to just make life so much easier if you can get a really good grip on that. And everything that we just spoke about is really all those are all the ingredients of how you get there,
Yeah, and
right?
then
It's like, oh, you're
utilization is another one that a lot of people don't talk about enough. Like we have, it's a scorecard metric in my business. Every week we measure the entire schedule utilization. So like you said, all the slots on all the individual time slots that are in the schedule. And when it drops below 70%, it's a big problem. And again, we look at trends one week if it's a holiday or whatever, we don't,
yeah,
take too many actions on 1 or 2 weeks, but there's really three off the top of my head. There's three ways to improve utilization. You can either get more clients to fill those spots, you can get clients to show up more often, or you can start slashing schedules, sessions on the schedule. And that's like, my ops person, it's like when that number is there, we're like, hey, which one of the three are we gonna like really dive into? I'll tell you which one I would do. I would just cut the ones that are dragging down the percentage.
yeah.
And again, you can only know that if you have an understanding of this. Like all these data points are critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else that we've gotten into as well as we're just staying on data is not only tracking like some of these lagging indicators, right, which are output focused, right? Like what are the results of whatever you did,
Yeah.
utilization, revenue, sales metrics even. But one thing that we really focused in on is behavioral KPIs, right? So getting into that, something that I think is a real tactical takeaway for anyone listening to this, but what you measure will improve or at least will have your focus. So what does that even mean, right? If I was a solo operator, or if I'm have one location with the team or multiple, I mean, how many referral asks did you have today? How many upsell asks did you have today? Whatever you do that's predictive of the outputs in your business or things that you want to consider tracking, behavior based actions that you can track, right? And some of it's self-reporting, yeah, right. Like you're not going to have a machine tell you or Google Sheet tell you how many you did, but it really keeps you focused on the most important things. So I think that's a real tactical thing. After you've got the foundational pieces in place, and hopefully you have, good KPIs. Most of that's lagging, though. You really need to find the things that are going to be more predictive.
So what
So
are the
I don't know.
what are the because they would call those like leading indicators, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
people think
I
about
look at it
this.
as a difference of inputs versus outputs,
Yeah.
leading versus lagging, for sure.
A great book on this is The Four Disciplines of Execution. It's one of my favorites. But the way you think about it is like what is actually within your control? Because the mistake most
Exactly.
people make is like they're like their scorecard looks like tr tr leads generated, trials sold, and membership number. And I'm like, great, you can do absolutely nothing with that that's measurable. So
Yeah.
what do you guys measure on that in your business?
Yeah, it's some of the things I just mentioned, right? Referral. So like any of our facility leaders, we're tracking referral asks, we're tracking upsell asks. We find member meetings to be a leading indicator of both retention and also it's going to help with those other two items. So how many member meetings are we having on a weekly basis? So those would probably be the big three
Yeah.
that
And
we're
do you have tools that you use that, because you said some of it's like personal reporting. Do you have any software
That's what it
tools?
is. It's behavior based, right? So
Yeah.
it's self-reporting on that. So I think you need to have like a good a culture of accountability for that to work, right?
Yeah.
In your business, that's definitely a big part of it. But I mean, we just use the Google Sheet, right? Like we've used different online tools for different things, but that's what we use. Some other metrics too, just to you give some more tactical, get more tactical here would be how many sales calls you made in a day, how
Yep.
many outbound texts were sent. You could measure your engagement on social media if that's part of your
Yep.
marketing strategy, right? So those are just things that are 100% within your control. that if you are a super busy operator, if you want to stay focused on what's going to actually drive your business forward, though you want to find a way to track those behaviors. And that should be your dashboard every day, in addition to the outputs, right? Because you can't, ignore it. But I think we got to this place because of exactly what you just said. It's like you're looking at the lagging indicators in your business and be like, great, leads are off track, or our trials are off track, or members are off track. But what do you do with that information, right? You need to get out in front of that a little bit,
Yeah.
right? So that's how we got there. But we just covered a couple different areas there, right? Most of that marketing related, some sales related stuff. But I mean, to me, those are the things. Utilization's obviously important. Um, you can look at weekly attendance as well. So if you want to get more retention focus, it
Yeah.
could be weekly attendance of your members, right? That would be important as well. So you just want to think about what are the behaviors that you're seeing that are going to help drive the results that you're trying to produce and track them on a regular basis.
Yeah, and a few things here. So we use a system called Nomly, and it's a client text messaging system that gives me reports. So we have a staff scorecard and an area of utilization that we track at my main location because we have 7 trainers. There's a lot of different session times. We'll run 3 sessions at once at any given time. Uh, One of the things that we'll track is staff utilization. So for every coach, what is the percentage of their individual sessions that uh, become full?
Yeah.
So if a staff member, a coach, drops below 70% of their individual session utilization, that's like a really big red flag. And then we coach them on like how to fill their sessions, like asking for referrals, getting, people to shift to their schedule. Maybe it's a lot more nuanced, like developing a skill set that is more appealing to train with. But yeah, like for us, we use Nomly. It gives me a report of how many outbound text messages are sent for every single staff member. For us, that's a retention tool because it's just we're sending, congrats, hype stuff to clients and it helps with engagement. So that's what we track is how many messages did you send in this last week? Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's most people stop at just those lagging indicators and they don't dig deep. And I think if you're listening to this, the question to ask yourself is like, let's do sales on the sales side. Like, if you had to go sign up a new client, what would you do? Like for me, I would go and I would call probably 10 people. It would probably take me 10 like regen calls to sign up one regenerated client. So that becomes the framework. Like just kind of think about what would you do and then how can you measure that? And sometimes there's tools, sometimes like you said it's self-reported, but it's kind of as simple as that. And a lot of times you're just guessing
Yeah.
and then until you have data to really refine.
Exactly, right. And you may have your sales CRM can probably track how many outbound calls you made too, right? Anomaly
Yeah.
is a great system that's going to track the tech. So yeah, I think just having the right tools in place is important. But again, the reason I share that is I've worked with enough gym owners over the years to know that everything is always important, right? It
Yeah.
feels that way. But you're not prioritizing the most important stuff, right? It's too easy to get caught behind a desk or caught in your office not moving the ball down the field where you should be asking for referrals. You should be doing the things that are going to actually move your business forward, making more calls, right? Reaching out to former members, meeting with current members. Those are the things that are going to drive revenue in your business. And if it's important, you should track at what level you're doing that at, right? So you can see your own trend over time and see how that correlates to the results that you're producing. So I just think that's such an important part of it. And I
Yeah.
wish I would have known that earlier in my own career.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
because again,
this
you
kind of
just you
brings
think
us,
everything's important.
yeah, and this kind of brings us full circle to that ops stuff because so I'll give you, so I have an episode about like how we, do retention and it's client meetings. So that's the number is like how many client meetings have we had? And the way we determine to put this on the scorecard, I kind of mapped out, I'm like, all right, for a client to stay, how many client meetings do they need to have? I was like, one, I need the opportunity for every client to have a meeting once per quarter. So if I have 100 clients, I need 100 time slots across a 90-day period. So divide that by, 13, which is 13 weeks. I would take 100 slots divided by 13. I don't know what that is. I think it's 7 or 8. So then I'm
Right.
like, all right,
Sounds right.
I need to have available 7 time slots per week to then fill. right? So I build the schedule to be like, all right, I need to service 7 client success meetings every single week to get me there. Now, I basically was like, only 60% of clients are going to actually do this. So that initial 100 number goes down to 60, makes it a lot more reasonable. But when people are like, how do you track client success meetings? Like, you can bring like a very, very concrete number to that instead of just being like, let's just do 5 a week. Like,
Yeah.
really, again, start with the end in mind. Be like, I want every single client to meet with me, have the opportunity to meet with me once a quarter. How many clients do you have divided by weeks? And then that's how you build it.
Yeah, that's right. I love that. We do something very similar. So I think that makes a ton of sense. And none of this is a perfect science, right? Like what works for one member is not going to work for everyone, to your point. Maybe only 60% of your members want to actually have those meetings, but you have those opportunities available. And the numbers in your business aren't going to lie, right?
Yeah.
If you have good retention, you're mostly right on some of the bets that you're making, right? Or
Yeah.
you're doing something right. So again, you're not going to ever have all the information to make the decisions that you need to make. And it's not going to apply 100% across the board, but you want to find the things that are going to move the needle. And that certainly is one of them. So I
Well, and
agree with
just
that.
test, like put it on paper and then just keep testing it. Like we've done that. I'm like, man, like we're taking a guess that that's enough touch points,
Right.
but every month we're going to review it and be like, all right, if we're hitting this metric, but it's not improving our retention, maybe we need a different metric. Um,
Exactly.
so
Yeah. If you're crushing your member meetings, but your retentions is awful, then clearly it's not a leading indicator of retention, or you're just not doing, or your meetings are not effective. You need to work on what you're accomplishing in those meetings as well, right? So it does open your eyes to that
yeah,
possibility.
well, dude, we were a little all over the place, but I think again, you're very meticulous and like structured with the way you think about business. What's the game plan for Game Changer going forward?
Yeah, it's to continue to grow, right? I think it's easy to say that, right? You want to keep opening up locations. I think I've had something that I've told myself. It's my North Star, I would say. I want to have 40 locations by the time that I'm 40, right? But
Wow.
none of that really matters, right? In terms, and what I say by that, what I mean by that, it's not a number of, it's all arbitrary. There's no number of locations or revenue number that's going to define, what success is. I look at it as I always looked at this is my sports franchise. I played sports growing up, right, my whole
Yeah.
life, and this is the sports franchise that I own, right? And
Yeah.
as long as we're growing and we're moving in the right direction and we are having fun and we are enjoying the ride, I think that's what's most important. I feel like I know you operate on EOS too, Devin, and I feel like the more I've gotten into business, the less like some of the numbers have become important, and the further out it is, I guess, because it really is about enjoying
Yeah.
what you're doing, right? Or you want to make sure you're playing the right game, and as long as it doesn't mean every day is going to be fun. You're going to enjoy every aspect of your business, but when you take a step back and say this is a game that I want to be playing right now, it is, right? So I think the way that I view that is continuing to grow. I'd look at what we're doing. It's personal development just as much as it is professional development,
Yeah.
right? And right now I feel like there's still a lot of juice to squeeze out of growing more and challenging myself and seeing how far we can go as a company. So I think that is really the North Star. So if that's 40 locations by the time I'm 40, then great, right? Or if it's more than that or less than that, that's fine. But that is the less arbitrary, that's the mission when you take the arbitrary numbers out of it.
Yeah.
But I think it's to see how far I can take this and see who I become in that process, who the team members that we have that has to grow. It's everyone here. So I enjoy right now I'm enjoying the challenge of doing something that we haven't done before.
Yeah. And
So
a
maybe
few
not a
things.
straightforward answer, but
Well, no, it is. And I think I'm in mastermind groups and stuff like that. And, we set a goal. We want to do 100 locations. And again, for me, it has much more to do with who I become in that process. It's much less about like what it means from a financial perspective and more to be like, I want to become the person that built a 100 location business. And I think that's what excites me. Like I genuinely get excited thinking about all of that, and I love it. I mean, I love it every day. But I talk to a lot of gym owners, and they're like, "Yeah, I just want maybe like 3 gyms," and I'm like, "Geez, like that's a snooze fest." Like And again, when they go to another location, they're like, oh, well, that was kind of easy. I'm like, yeah, your fucking goal is really boring. Like you might as well just create a really big goal and just see what happens. So
Right, right. Yeah, it's also there's a concept you may have heard of like 10x is easier than 2x,
yeah,
right?
yep,
And it's like if you just want to do two or three, you can probably hustle and grind your way to that and be miserable in that process, right? But when you have when you have a bigger vision, a bigger plan, it's you need to think at a different level, right? You can't just hustle and grind your way to
yeah.
going 10x. And that doesn't mean like the quantity is not to be 10x, but the qualitative is 10x, right? And this is not my concept, right? Dan Sullivan talked a
Yeah.
lot
And
about
that's
this,
that's honestly
strategic coach,
exactly why I started saying 100 because I'm like, you know what? It
right?
forces me to think on a completely different planet about systems and operation and leadership. So,
Right.
yeah. But well, listen, man, this was awesome. If anybody wants to reach out, ask you questions, are they allowed to do that and how can they do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm not super active on social. I'm busy operating my businesses, but
Yeah.
that would be the best place to hit me up, reach out to me at Joe Meglio GC and on LinkedIn. Those would be the best places. So check us out, GameChangerFitness.com.
Yeah. And Google Joe Meglio had a deadlift like a man.
I don't think it's active anymore. That feels like a lifetime ago.
All right. Thanks, man. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this content, make sure that you like and subscribe to get more of the content that you want to see about growing your fitness business. You can click any of the videos here to see other episodes, but I want to hear from you. So drop some comments into other content that you would like to see.